that I think Gab, it's when you aren't having free speech and open discussion and people aren't being challenged and having their thoughts challenged, like on a Facebook or a Twitter, and they go to Gab and it's just an echo chamber of white nationalism if they want it to be, then that just grows the problem. And I also think that the banning of Alex Jones has given Alex Jones's message a lot of credence. I think I don't know about you.
Unfortunately,
you're in North Carolina. I'm in Indiana. We were talking about this, and my type of Republican that I grew up around is the more cosmopolitan Republican, the lawyers. I grew up as a talk radio show producer and a reporter, and so the Republicans, and as a volunteer, and so the Republicans I knew all wore nice leather shoes and suits, and
these are not the Republicans in my area.
Yeah, and the Republicans in your area are what?
They're more what you think of as Trump voters, but even before Trump, the Republicans in our area are, they're small business owners, but this is not, it's not that much of a jump for me to see Trump voters. There's always been that motive there.
Yeah, down in North Carolina, it's a little bit different than maybe, here in a Midwestern city. And so when people,
even that is different from California Republicans are way more libertarian than anywhere else in the country.
Bill Weld was talking shit about New York Republicans. So, no, I think, so when something like the bomber comes along, not the shooter, because we're talking a lot about the shooter, but this bomber guy who had he had basically a rap, like the stickers. I listened to Alex Jones last week to see what he was saying about it. And the dude,
you were so surprised by those stickers. I have seen multiple cars with those.
I have seen one or two of those over the years, but I was like, this looks fake. And you're like,
oh
no, they're definitely not fake.
Yeah. I'm like, I know people who've made these themselves. I know, I could recommend to you where you could make this. Oh gosh, I'm thinking all the bike shows that I've gone to, and they will have booths that sell stuff like this. This is not new. I appreciate that this is crazy and new to other parts of the country, but this kind of very outspoken, somebody knows that there's an opinion there. I don't know. It really surprises me that everybody else thinks that this is clearly not real. I don't know. It's the only way I can think to say it. It just really shocks me.
Yeah. It to me is it's a culture shock that somebody like that existed.
Oh no, you come down and visit. I will introduce you to people.
But I guess Florida Man does exist. And so this guy, you look at it, here's a guy who took the time to lay this out on Photoshop and then have a professional rap printed. And I could totally see how people could see the fresh painted van, the professionally done stickers, and totally think that the FBI did it. I totally understand that line of thinking, and I totally understand why some people would have those thoughts. I
can see that, but to me, it makes much more sense to go, no, he's just one of those guys who is that into Trump that, he spent his Saturday laying out his stickers because that's all he had to do. And, paid the guy down the block who's also a really big Trump fan to come and wrap his car. And they,
yeah,
it's a community thing.
Exactly right. And so, and then you hear the interview with the boss, which I heard on No Agenda Show, which I love, but they were like, come on, this is so staged.
I'll have to send you some examples. So my husband, he also makes stickers actually as part of what he does for a job. He does custom vinyl stickers, and he's had a couple of Trump ones that have come through that he'll get them and he'll take a picture of the order that he has to make. He'll just be like, this pains me to make this.
You've sent them to me. Yeah. Usually involving police.
Oh yes. Yeah. Oh, see, I wasn't even thinking of that one. Yeah. But there are several of those. It's not just one crazy person.
But yeah, people have taken photos of this guy driving down the street but this particular incident, I have never seen on Twitter or Facebook or read in the press or heard people mainstream voices, which I consider Rush Limbaugh to be mainstream, mainstream voices like Rush Limbaugh say that this is just a false flag. Like Alex Jones has really like taken over the Alex Jones mindset of everything's a false flag. I don't trust it. It's all fake news. And so I really think that the pursuit of Alex Jones, banning him, has given more credence to Alex Jones, and people take it more seriously because, look, they're taking people like Liberty Memes off of Facebook. They're taking Alex Jones off of everything. They're removing the guy's ability to take money or make money. You know, they're taking Facebook friends off like me for 30 days for alleged hate speech. You know, so it's like these little things where it just kind of confirms the narrative, and away we go. And so when something like this does happen, where the timing is suspicious and the guy does look suspicious, and there are these little things that when Tad Western posts the 4chan photo shots and the diagrams, you go, yeah, I kind of believe it, because these guys are all scumbags. They're all the press is all liars.
Yeah, I don't know. Some of it has to be that echo chamber effect, but I think when you have somebody who is screaming, they're going, you know, they're trying to silence me, and then you go, okay, well, we're going to silence you. You know, how can you not lend credence to it? But,
right.
You know, I think it would have helped if they had been more clear. I mean, that's one of the things that has been pointed out so many times is they keep banning people, they keep taking pages down, and they're not really being clear on why. It's like, oh, inauthentic accounts, or you know, they'll send you one specific thing, you know, a screenshot of something that you did wrong, but you know, there's no warning, there's no clarification. So I don't know how you're going to expect better behavior out of that.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just, I'm a nanny. That's basic how you deal with children. If there's a bad behavior, you can't just punish the bad behavior and expect the person to guess at what they need to fix. You have to make sure that they understand this is the action that led to this result. So don't do that again if you don't want that to happen.
When Liberty Memes has no idea why they're banned, then to me it's
really hard to say, yeah. You know, to not say, oh, it's ideological.
Because what does Facebook think that an account with 600,000 likes doesn't have some other network attached to it that isn't going to be able to get the word out that they've been banned for no reason, and that looks suspicious?
Yeah.
It's just bad business. Like Facebook is an incredible product that has changed the world for the good and bad, and yet it still does some of the dumbest stuff I've ever seen a company do.
Well, but they also have to consider their customers that aren't libertarians. You know, as much as we can say, well, how could you just do that and expect it to not have, you know, backlash? I'm sure there was some considered and weighed decision making there. I'm sure they said, well, if we don't do anything, if we continue to allow this to happen, then we're going to get, you know, the backlash of more people saying that we're spreading disinformation. We might lose more users from that. You know, maybe it's just that we're not as important of a community as we had maybe hoped we are. But well, you're stuck in this back and forth. You're either it's proving that, oh yes, we are clearly, you know, a threat, or it's saying that, like, no, even the problems, or, you know, even the backlash of silencing you is not that bad.
Right. You know, as I see like the Gab stuff going across the media, I consider the language being used around conspiracy theory and hate speech. Conspiracy theory right now, it's like you listen to Vox podcasts like I do. You know, I listened to the 538 podcast about this week, and it was just Ezra Klein saying conspiracy theory about things that are not conspiracy theories. It's things that he doesn't like, and so he just turns it into hate speech. And you're just like, no, see, you're abusing that actual term. You're abusing that, and so it loses its power, and then people go, okay, well, everything's a conspiracy theory. Like, they don't seem to understand the tit for tat that goes on here.
Yeah, I recently had a conversation with a friend about this kind of rhetoric and the way that this goes, where you have these big, very heavy words that are used, you know, and thrown around just as a reason to dismiss something or a reason to ignore someone. You know, the example that she had used was a meme that she was showing, which thought was hilarious. That she said, on one side it says, the right says we want genocide, and the left says no genocide. The center says come on, guys, you need to compromise. The right says, okay, how about some genocide? The left says, no, still no genocide. Center says, see, this is why nobody likes you guys.
Right.
And so we then had a conversation about like, yeah, but the problem here is that you just assigned genocide as the policy positions of the right.
Right.
You don't think that maybe is a little bit extreme and maybe undermines the seriousness of genocide?
Ben Shapiro was talking about this, about immigration today, and he said, this is some advice for my libertarian-leaning friends who think who are open borders people and liberals. So the reason that Trump keeps winning on immigration is that you guys say there's no problem. Well, you have to admit that there's some problem, that there is some issue going on. And basically his point was because a lot of people think that, and this was a former co-host position always, is that until libertarians fix their messaging and AKA philosophy on open borders, they're never going to win.
Yeah.
And which I firmly disagree. You just figure out how to message it better.
The one time recently that I had to defend open borders actually on a radio show, I was really encouraged by one of the other panelists, paused, and he goes, oh, wow. So like libertarians care about like everyone's freedom, not just Americans.
Right.
It's like, yeah, that's, a radical idea though.
What libertarians have to understand is that immigration, like being an American, is a key part of everyone's identity in this country, or most people.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have a very distinct view of nationalism and nationality, and we don't like the pledge because it's propaganda. We don't like the flag. We don't like not the flag, but you see people calling it the sky cloth even. Or, but most people have not thought about it in the way that libertarians have thought about it. And so being an American, having said the pledge every day before school and seeing the national anthem waved before moments that they were with their family at sporting events where amazing moments with their family took place, like that they talk about for years to come, like nationalism, being an American, I guess I would say, is a key part of their identity. And so when you say there should be no borders, they hear there should be no huge piece of my identity. And so they react to it very negatively. And so you have to explain why, like, what is the greater purpose? What is the piece of identity that you will retain? You have to really think of it when you're making arguments, and when we're crafting the arguments for these programs. We really try to think about, how do people think about this? What is the most effective argument that's going to get someone to change their mind and think about it in different terms? And so I think libertarians just go...
The assumption that leftists often make, that kind of I think is the argument that works, that needs to be made, but they assume that everybody's already there, is you have to get them to identify as, humans, as,
right.
This greater, okay, yes, you can still have this identity as you're Americans, but that doesn't mean that we don't all identify also as people.
Right. So I think we message it sometimes as, this is just the correct way to believe, this is the correct way to think, and if you don't like it, then you're an idiot. And that's just not effective for most people. But
it sure feels good.
Sure. So yeah, back to but what Shapiro was basically saying is that when you just continually deny that there's a problem, Trump goes, well, there is a problem. No, there's no problem. No, this is a big issue. No, there's no problem. This is a crisis. No, you're an idiot. There's no problem here. Look, and any that might, so it just becomes when you're not. I think what he was trying to say is, when you're not willing to compromise or admit or bring something to the table, then it just feeds that other side's tit for tat. Mm-hmm. And so that's the opposite argument, and that's what I see going on with the media. Like, we'll talk about Donald Trump first, and here in a second, how much Trump is to blame. But first, I want to talk about the media's kind of tit for tat with some of this stuff. I want to play this piece. Brian Stelter at CNN. He is the media reporter. Formerly, he started TV Newser and then got hired to replace Howard Kurtz as the media observer over at CNN after Howard Kurtz said something that was, I don't know if it was racist or what, but now he's at Fox News. And he and Oliver Darcy, the two media reporters there, I just never seen two guys argue against free speech harder in my life. And Stelter was somebody that I just always watched, and I was like, that'd be a fun job. I really like his take on things. And then now Trump has driven him so crazy Alex Jones has driven him so crazy. Like, all Brian Stelter does is appear on CNN, and he does anti-Fox News reports. And it's so nakedly one network trying to lower the position of their number one competitor that it's obvious. Like, just listen to this, and let's kind of break this down as we go along. Sarah, if you hear something that you want to kind of go, I've got a point about that, just kind of speak up. So this is...
The president is now blaming the media for the anger behind this, and society saying, in part, it's caused what he called...
the anger around the packages, I should say.
Caused by, rather, purposely false and inaccurate reporting of the mainstream media. Here with us now is CNN business media correspondent and host of Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter. You know the blame conversation. There goes the liberal media again.
Yeah, they're actually playing the victim card, engaging in victimhood politics, saying that because people are talking about how Trump's rhetoric is a problem, that somehow he's being blamed for these bombs, and as a result, he's the victim of this. Look, it's nonsense. What I'm wondering, Jim and Poppy, is where's the president? Where's the president today? Because that guy on Twitter...
So Brian Stelter says it's nonsense that Donald Trump is being blamed, and then immediately transitions into, where's the president? Why is he not? He starts blaming Trump for not leading, not doing... I mean, and it's not that his criticism isn't necessarily wrong, because Donald Trump does play the victim.
And both sides do at this point.
Exactly right. And it's not that Donald Trump isn't the victim. Like, there was a headline in the group about something. I don't know what it was, but it was a couple days ago in the We Are Libertarians group, which you can join at wearelibertarians.com. And it was shocking because it was when it was a CNN headline that actually lined up with the truth. It was super anti-Trump.
Oh, I remember this.
Yes, It was about him denying the Constitution. Can you look that up? It was about the 14th Amendment. You can do a search in the group. But like, the person posted it in the group basically saying, look, CNN is being anti-Trump again. And I just commented like, no, they actually got this one right. It's super anti-Trump, but they're right. He's wrong. You know, and you like look at it from like an objective perspective, and CNN's just not even trying anymore. Like, they are just anti-Trump, anti-Republican, anti-conservative. Most of the media is that way. At the New York Times, the Washington Post, a lot of the flotation between the liberal clickbait blogosphere like HuffPo and Raw Story into CNN, into the New York Times, into the it's the same kind of pool of people, and they all they all have a very center-left perspective, which is, you know, needed in society. But then they use conspiracy theory and hate speech and all these other things to detract. But and it creates this environment where Donald Trump is to blame for everything. It's become the left's version of thanks, Obama. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Well, it allows them to avoid actually having to have a discussion about policy, because, you know, you actually have to discuss what you're going to do when neither side really wants to do anything.
No, that'd be bad television. TV news especially it's about good television. And
yeah, it's stopped long ago being about a discussion of ideas or, you know, how you can solve anything. It's just trying to highlight whatever is the scariest thing or the most exciting thing or whatever is going to get you emotionally worked up and get you to pay attention more.
The headline was, Trump claims he can defy Constitution and end birthright citizenship.
Yeah, that's exactly what he claimed.
That's exactly what he claimed. I said, LOL.
Because you don't need to sensationalize that anymore.
Right, but they tried, and LOL when the slanted headline finally matches his actions. So he does. You kind of go, even as a non-Trump voter, a never-Trumper, you kind of go, God, if we were in that position, it'd be the same treatment. That's always been my position. It's like, watch how Donald Trump is treated. Libertarian Gary Johnson would be treated the same way. It would be, here's how he is a racist, a bigot, a homophobe. He's an evil white man. Like, I look at it and I go, they're going to pull out. I don't know what.
Yeah, but the right does the same thing to the left. I mean, this is just, I watched all the North Carolina Republicans do this through Obama's entire presidency. I mean, I cannot tell you how many times people would be like, I'm not racist, and then compare him to an ape.
Right. I don't know what it is about me. I have this thing where all through Obama, I was very anti-Republican. And now that Trump is president, I'm very anti-Democrat. And I think it's because...
You're a contrarian?
Maybe. but it's also that I hate liars and manipulation, and I think there's just this thing that when a party is out of power, they start taking things so far beyond the reality that it's just like, as a thinking person, you go, okay, you're trying to manipulate people. Quit being an ass bag.
Yeah.
So let's continue with Little Brian Stelter on CNN.
That's a Fox News host. That guy railing against the media, that's a Fox News host. That's not the president.
So, Brian,
the president hasn't shown leadership in the last few hours. He did say some nice things yesterday, but then he turned around and railed against the media again.
So, Brian, sorry to jump in, but we just have some sound from the White House that I want to get our viewers to this morning.
Do you believe that the president bears any responsibility for what we've seen over the past 2 days? And does he regret any of the comments that he's made about his opponents? Or does he at least regret the tone that he's taken?
Look, the president's condemned violence in all forms, has done that since day one, will continue to do that, but certainly feels that everyone has a role to play.
He's calling for us.
I'm sorry, I always found that funny. The continued claims of Trump. He has denied violence. He has condemned it, except for when it's funny. Then we will encourage it.
Yeah. So you and I kind of we didn't have a back and forth, but you were kind of countering, and I thought you were right. Donald Trump, he definitely said some violent stuff.
I think you can acknowledge that Trump says things that he clearly did not think before saying.
Sure.
And he probably shouldn't say, and that, people who are not in the right mindset could take in a bad way. But I don't necessarily think that needs to be taken to the extreme of being like, therefore he holds personal responsibility. Yes, he could be one of several factors, and any individual person who was already predisposed to an act of mass violence would have found somebody else to latch onto. But, maybe it didn't have to be the president.
Right, because in the case of the shooter, he says on Gab that because of so the New York Times podcast, I highly recommend it. The past week or so, some of the ones about anti-Semitism, really stuff that I had kind of watched, the 3 parentheses. I had always seen that, but I didn't really know what the origin of that was. And one of the reporters talks about it, and I thought that anti-Semitism episode was really interesting, and they talked about some of this stuff. And so they were talking about what motivated this guy. And so in the Jewish community, a certain group is well known for trying to help refugees. I forget, it's HIAS. But I don't have that in the notes, what that actually stands for. I think it's the Hebrew something.
Hebrew International Aid Society.
Yes, thank you. And so, given their history, the Jewish population in America is very ready to help refugees of any kind, because their history is one of the beautiful things about the Jewish religion is their act of remembering. They remember. The thing that I love about that religion that I wish all societies would adopt is that they take points of their history and they remember things that happened. And so that's why we have a very clear scripture from them, for instance, over thousands of years. And, obviously being refugees, this group was helping the migrant caravan. And so this guy said, screw your optics, I'm going in. And about 5 minutes later was actually inside shooting up the synagogue. It was a baby naming ceremony, a bris, and 11 people were killed. And they talk about some of the people that were killed in that podcast and some of the beautiful, some of the just amazing people that lost their lives that day on that particular podcast. But, the fallout of this stuff, it's like you look at it and as an American, you feel horrible for those people. And you want to grieve it, but then people immediately veer into trying to steer it into their own political camp, and I include the media in that. And you just kind of go, it's trying to take these 3 incidents of people who clearly have mental health issues, and yes, this guy shot people because of the caravans supposedly, but that to me isn't a very stable person, and so. When I hear Donald Trump is to blame for all the violent rhetoric in society, I roll my eyes a lot. Yes, he said stuff like, I'll pay for the lawyer back in 2016, but it's like 2018 at this point, We're almost into 2019, and at some point,
how recent was that comment about like, did you see what he did with that reporter?
yeah, but listen, I guess
again, only when it's funny.
I get it, and I think you're totally right, and he should not say that, and we'll talk a little bit about a command climate in a moment. But here's the thing with Trump. I guess I'm not afraid of him, and I think there are too many people that are afraid of this guy because they have they don't have it. This is the problem with a lack of civic education in the United States. People are afraid, and people don't have an understanding of how things work, and so they think that the president has an outweighed. He has way more effect on their life than he actually does.
Yeah. I think part of the reaction though is that like you're asking like why does this become something that we have to politicize so quickly? I was just thinking about it. It's one of those things that you, in order to kind of wrap your head around the shooting fully, it quickly takes you to where are your views on very political topics. So yes, it's a horrible thing, but like it's even more horrible. This is a person who he was not just being anti-Semitic, but he had a problem with people who were helping other immigrants. And that quickly leaves you to like, well, is that something that you find understandable or not? And I don't know. I find it difficult to not have that go to a political place.
Yeah. And then there's also the use of a gun.
Yeah.
And Trump stepped in it. Wrong place, wrong time, saying the truth, which is had they had armed guards, this would have ended very quickly. There was an incident in a McDonald's that...
Yeah, but you know what? You can't have armed guards everywhere, and if you do, is that really a society that you want to live in?
Well, but so did you hear about the McDonald's shooting?
Is this the black couple who was shot?
No, that was Kroger. So that
was Kroger. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this was in that was the third incident that they were talking about in that piece earlier. Guy, a few days before the bomber was caught, was going to a black church to shoot it up because he was anti-black, and ended up going to a Kroger because he couldn't get in. They had locked the doors, and they had security, and so he went to Kroger's and he killed a black couple. This was in Alabama on October 29th from Time. The title is Customer Shoots and Kills Masked Gunman in Alabama McDonald's. McDonald's customer is being called a hero after he shot and killed a masked gunman who opened fire inside one of the fast food chain restaurants in Alabama. The shootout happened at the McDonald's, 15 shots in total. All we hear is like different gunfire, said one employee. So in my mind, everybody's dead. A man wearing a mask barged into the restaurant, began shooting at the manager who was locking doors on Saturday night. A man who was leaving the McDonald's with his two sons then drew out his own gun and shot the masked man, who later died at a local hospital. So here's an incidence of somebody who is armed in a society where everyone has the ability to protect themselves and their immediate surroundings.
Well,
and he was able to prevent a further loss of life besides the perpetrator. So,
yes, it's great when you have the ability to open carry. I mean, we definitely have issues with gun-free zones, but in this case, you're talking about a religious service. You're talking about a situation in which people are going to, intentionally being unarmed. So, it's an extra kind of cruelty.
Yeah, but I think synagogues. I listened specifically to Ben Shapiro on Monday to see what he said. He was talking about how his every synagogue, every Jewish school, it's a way of life for Jews, and that everywhere they go, every religious, almost every synagogue has armed guards. Has the synagogue here in Indianapolis? There's only a couple, and some kid from actually from Reinhold's hometown drove up to the synagogue and drew a swastika on it, and so the reality is that violence is going to happen in the human animal, and it doesn't matter where you're at. You should have the ability to protect yourself and your community, and I don't think that a religious zone makes that any less necessary. In fact, I think it makes it more necessary because it's a large gathering of people, and it shouldn't be that way. But that's just the reality of living in the world at any point in human history, now or in the future or in the past. So,
I guess that could really just comes down to the is, ought, should issue. There is, is this the society that you want to perpetuate?
I don't think that it is a matter of perpetuation. I think it's a matter of being realistic. I think there's two services, like the Black Church this week, and then also the Jewish synagogue. I think that's just how it is. I think.
Well, okay, but this is the idea behind terrorism. Terrorism works when you're terrorized into changing your behavior.
Sure.
When you're made to act like you're not safe at any given time. Like, I mean, it has taken a lot to just be comfortable, like walking to my car through a well-lit area and not having to like prepare to take down an attacker, because realistically, like, that's fairly low chances. And if that was going to happen, I probably was not going to be able to protect myself anyways. That's the difference between, how much of it is accepting reality. Like, yes, there's a reality that you're always at risk no matter what you do. But how much of a risk is that? How much of a risk are you willing to pretend there is?
Well, this is an argument that I have with Harry, that I make the point that you're making, and Harry makes the point I'm making. I make the point that we're safer than we've ever been in human history. Like, life is better than it's ever been. We're going to talk about the history of political violence in America.
But that still doesn't change the fact that every human interaction involves risk. You can never zero out that risk.
See, now you sound like Harry. Harry's like, you have no idea how in danger you are all the time. You should Harry's so paranoid, Sarah. That
I just believe in conscious risk taking, like risk aware. Be aware that everything that you are doing is risky, and therefore you're never fully safe, but you are safe.
Right.
Like, you have to take a risk every time, but you're also taking the risk that, like, you're a really good person.
Harry claims that I should call the police and tell them that we're doing a live stream every single time we live stream, because someone could crank call a bomb threat and the police will knock on my door and kill us while we're doing the show. And I go, Harry, there are limits to being paranoid.
Yeah.
Like, I'm paranoid, but that's ridiculous. Yeah. So
yeah, I mean, like, I had this conversation with my husband. We live in a very safe, very small town. Like, I've looked up, the crime rates and everything, and it's one of those places that's so small that, like, the crime rate looks like very standard.
Mm-hmm.
That's only because there's very few people and there were like 2 property crimes.
Right.
So, we've had debates about, it's okay to go and walk somewhere by yourself. It's okay to walk a couple blocks, even in the evening.
Yeah.
It's very safe, but it's hard to get past that.
I forget what I was listening to, but they were talking about that mentality where it's the idea of free-range children, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
You probably know all about it. Tell us about free-range children.
So it's kind of the opposite of helicopter parenting. So one of the things that's really emphasized now and even made legally required in a lot of ways is you have to kind of be tethered to a child at all times. This causes so many issues developmentally, because it's really important that kids learn how to be independent and learn how to make good decisions on their own. So free range parenting is just the idea that, like, you can allow kids to be kids and you have to give them some freedom. It's letting kids walk to a park. If you've got a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, they can all walk down the street to a park and play by themselves. And they don't necessarily require adult supervision. But in some places, that's considered child neglect, and that can get you arrested.
Yeah, we did an episode. If you look free range children up in the feed, you'll see an episode about parents who let their kids walk to the park, and they got their kids taken away by CPS.
Oh, let me tell you about leaving a child in the car. This is the personal experience here.
How does that happen?
I have right now, I usually have 2 2-year-olds, and I have a 3-year-old that I have to pick up from preschool. So when I have only 1 2-year-old, it's perfectly easy to just pop the kid out of the car, carry him, throw him in a quick stroller, and go in and get the 3-year-old and come back out. But when I have 2 kids, it's exponentially more difficult to get 2 2-year-olds out of a car, into a stroller, into a building, get a 3-year-old, and then get everybody back out and back into the car. It easily triples the amount of time.
Right. So
being absolutely terrified the first few times I did this, I made the conscious decision to acknowledge that, okay, they are safe. We are in a preschool parking lot. We are in a very well, it's fenced in even. Like, this is pretty much the safest place that they could be. I had a car that has, remote start. So if it's too hot, I can make sure to have the air conditioner on. If it's too cold, I can, have the heat on. That way they would always be comfortable. I wouldn't have to worry about like an overheated child. But I was so scared of coming back and having somebody like call the cops or broken a window because they decided it was unsafe that I left the kids in the car for the 2 minutes that it requires me to walk in and get the third child.
Right.
I didn't have any issues with it, but like, that is such an ingrained fear. And when we're talking about like acknowledging reality, you kind of have to go to that. Okay, but which reality here are we reinforcing? Are we reinforcing the reality where it is a risk and a terrible thing every time that you leave your child in a car for any period of time because somebody could kidnap that child, somebody could kill the child, somebody could, the child could overheat, the child could choke on something. Yeah, there's a lot of things that could happen, but are they likely to happen? What could happen if you take the child inside? The child could trip, the child could still choke on something. There are risks with both decisions, and you have to consciously decide, okay, it's actually safer and more convenient for everybody if I leave you in the car for 2 minutes than if I go through a 20-minute production to get you out and put you back in.
Yeah. It was the SAS interview where he talked about that, where it goes back to that thing where we take these little data points, where we take a synagogue shooting, or we take a kidnapping. Kidnappings have never been lower.
But technology allows us to know about every single
thing, and so the anxiety of modern society is killing us. And for the first time ever, for the last 3 years, what did he say? The life expectancy, or it was some data point where people aren't living as long or are dying earlier or something. It basically came down to deaths are increasing around despair.
Deaths of despair.
Deaths of despair, where it's, it's drug use or it's suicide. And so things are increasing because people are increasingly miserable. And so what he talks about in this interview is
particularly unemployed white men in former manufacturing sectors.
Exactly right. And, he talks about the reason that all of these problems are increasing in society is that people are increasingly more lonely. And so as we see the breakdown of the family, as we see the breakdown of communities of worship, of, even neighborhoods. I mean, think about how many of you know your neighbors.
Oh, my God, just the depressing story of trick-or-treating last night. We got all ready for trick-or-treaters, and we do this every year. We know we're getting trick-or-treaters. Some years we'll get like 1 or 2.
Right.
But I realize now it's because we have a town-sanctioned trick-or-treating where basically everybody goes 2 blocks away from us into the middle of town and they just hand out candy like in a line to kids.
This dumb-ass mother-effing trunk-or-treat.
It has completely destroyed the whole concept of community behind trick-or-treating. Like, you are supposed to go up to your neighbors and invade their space and get to know them in their home and get candy from them.
It's conditioning for you and your kids to get comfortable with those and to be nosy and peek inside their door.
Make little comments to each other, get to know you. I mean,
right.
I know
not this
one of my dad's favorite trick-or-treating stories is he tells there was a kid who was like trick-or-treating with his dad who knew was a town cop, and he made sure to give him like 2 full-size candy bars and said, see, we always make sure to give the officers a little bit more. And he goes, see, that's important. They're just joking back and forth that way. But that's an interaction that you can't have or you won't have necessarily if you don't have those little, traditions.
I think this is the person for this audience. If your community has trunk or treat,
you go trick-or-treating.
If your town tells you, the town that I work in sent out a text message at 11 on Monday night and saying we're doing it Tuesday night instead of Wednesday night because there might be a little rain. When my nieces were going out trick-or-treating, it was perfectly fine out. And I remember going when there was rain. There was nothing wrong with it. I
froze my ass off plenty of years. Come on, weather's not a thing.
Yes. So when your town says you're doing trunk or treat, you tell them, go F yourself. We're not doing trunk or treat. I'm not letting this communism infiltrate my community.
Let me tell you about fun things town do. So there's another town near us. and one town in Virginia actually that took it to a whole other level, that regulates the trick-or-treating. So there is trick-or-treating, but no trick-or-treating if you are over 12. So 13 and up, as soon as you're a teenager, you are not allowed to trick-or-treat. And if you do, it is punishable by, in Virginia, it is an actual town ordinance that it is punishable by up to, I think, a $50 fine or like a couple days in jail.
We used shame in my neighborhood. When I went trick-or-treating at 14, one of the neighbors said, "Aren't you a little too old for this?" And then the next one said it. And then the next one said it.
See,
and that's when I realized I was too old to do it.
Girl, is that we just get, do you have anybody that you're taking trick-or-treating?
Yeah, you can set up an Amazon wish list and still go trick-or-treating. That's the... So I think that if your church does trunk or treat, like sometimes churches do things because they want to promote the community, bring people to the church parking lot, do trunk or treat.
But they're pulling people out of the community.
They're pulling people out of the community, and you need to be a voice saying, "Stop! We need to be in the community, not bring people here, but actually go out into the world." Same with delivering meals to homeless people. Stop that. Give the meals to Wheeler Mission or your local homeless shelter who are equipped to handle it. So we've drifted off. Let's move back to the question of Donald Trump. How complicit is he in the violent rhetoric that goes on? I've made my point. I don't feel that he is. I feel that
in the violence or in the violent rhetoric.
In this particular violence, I don't see any. Like, the caravan thing is an unfortunate coincidence. These people are crazy. These are wackos who are trying to. They have pathologies. They're not trying. Maybe they're trying to make themselves famous, but they're sick individuals, and that's what you see in a lot of these mass shootings. Is these are people with pathologies that it doesn't matter whatever you blame it on. That is the circumstance. It's their broken brain that make them do it. But when it comes to the rhetoric around politics today, I do think Trump bears, like any president, he bears responsibility from a top-down perspective. I think Barack Obama, for instance,
they're responsible for how they use the bully pulpit, if nothing else.
Like Barack Obama used he used shame and he used mocking a lot. If you didn't agree with him, then he would mock you. He would, and this is a very Alinsky tactic that he writes about. You know, Trump does pretty much the same thing. I mean, and that's what he does is he mocks people, and so the left reacts just the way that the right did when Barack Obama did it, with outrage.
It is delightful seeing just these little mirrors.
Yes, exactly.
They hate it when you say that.
So how much do you think that Trump is to blame for rhetoric today? Like, what's the percentage, or how would you quantify it?
I mean, he's definitely more, I'm not necessarily violent, but like aggressive in his language. But there's, the mocking. You're right on with that. That, it's this issue of both sides. Whoever's in power has the ability to, to put you down, to make you feel small because they're the one who's big.
Yeah, and it works. I mean, here in Indiana, the most effective reason that people wouldn't vote for Rupert Boneham in 2012 for governor was that he had a beard. I can't vote for somebody for governor because he has a beard. And so really? I got my revenge this year when Mike...
Oh, how many times did you hear, but what is Aleppo? I can't.
Like, at least that was a failure of some substance and policy as opposed to a facial hair.
Yeah.
But Mike Braun here in Indiana is running for Senate, and the guy doesn't ever wear a suit to the debates. He's like the only candidate that's never worn a suit in the statewide debates. He dresses in a blue shirt. It's his thing. He is always in that blue shirt. That's like his calling card for whatever reason, and it's widely mocked. And he has transition lenses. And so during the televised debates, I make the point in various humorous ways that he disrespects voters by not dressing up for the part. And it drives Republicans out of their mind. And because this little superfluous, they're like, who cares? Who cares? Who cares? It's like, well, who cares that Rupert had a beard? Like a congressman's wife
apparently
brought it up. And so So making fun of his transition lenses and his blue shirt and that he doesn't wear a suit and he can't afford a suit because the Koch brothers wouldn't buy him one just makes all these Republicans that follow me jump on me, which then makes libertarians jump on them and Democrats too. Like, and
well, but I hate to say this, but I mean, you're practicing hypocrisy at that point. And I realize that you're doing it,
Absolutely.
to point out the humor of that hypocrisy. But like in doing so, you're also being a hypocrite.
Of course I am, but I'm making the choice to be a hypocrite, and I fully admit that. But the point is that it is the only thing that works. So at a certain point, libertarians have to think to themselves: do I want to be effective and win elections, and how much am I willing to sacrifice? Versus just like I could sit there and I could tweet out all night Lucy's policy positions, and I could tweet out insightful commentary that is polite about Mike Braun or Joe Donnelly, and no one's going to give a shit. But you make fun of a guy's transition lenses, and then all of a sudden, 50 people go, yeah, he really does disrespect voters by not wearing a suit.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you've started to sway the electorate for your candidate. I'm not the one who made the environment.
You have to make an appeal to emotion at some point.
Exactly right. And so would I make fun of Mike Braun's transition lenses to his face? Absolutely. Are there other things that I think about?
I feel like that's key. Is don't say anything behind somebody's back that you wouldn't say to their face.
Yes. Would I make fun of Mike Braun's intelligence? I don't think he's a very bright man, and so I wouldn't, because I wouldn't say that to his face. But something that is so over the top and stupid, like transition lenses, which I don't really care. Like, it's like you look at it and you go, that's so dumb, but then all of a sudden people get mad about it. And so I did it kind of as an experiment to see how effective it would be in a local race like this. And it was so painful because it was so effective in getting fellow Twitter people to vote in polls and to start to mimic the same talking point over and over something that is so easily graspable. Because if we start getting into politics, and so one Republican was just like, this is just outrageous, you're just practicing this way, and they have like MAGA all over their Facebook wall. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm just doing to Republicans the same thing that you've done to other people. Why are you mad about it? Why are you being a hypocrite?
Well, because we're supposed to be, I don't know. I feel like that's part of the libertarian rhetoric is that we're above this.
Fuck that.
But, I'm with you that, that's kind of one of those, well, that's why you don't win.
Do you want to win or do you want to be above it?
Yeah. When it comes to, political tactics, as much as we want to have these high-minded ideologies, at some point you have to kind of get amoral about it.
Yeah. I mean, I genuinely think that he's disrespecting voters, and I'm saying it in a way that I think is funny.
It definitely does sometimes make you cringe using tactics that are successful because you're like, I hate that this works on people.
Yep. And so if I didn't think that it was a serious point, then I wouldn't say it. Like the transition lenses thing is just funny to me because it's like something.
Yeah, I'm just picturing it.
And so he's on the
stage
debates.
Lights.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden they get dark, and you're just like, what? But
I wear myself.
But I fully admit that it's hypocritical. But at the end of the day, we're in the middle of a campaign, and I want Lucy to beat her record from 2016, and I want Lucy to win. And I don't think that either one of them should be elected. There is. There's been three.
There's nothing to spoil here.
There's 3 mailers that have been sent out by the Democratic Party calling the tax hike king of Indiana. And he voted for all these tax hikes, and then it promotes Lucy Brenton, the Libertarian candidate here in Indiana, and it's paid for by the Indiana Democrats. And so the Republicans are losing their mind over it and demanding that Libertarians denounce it. And
it's true.
And I just went on and I said, name one thing on that flyer that's wrong. There's nothing on it that's wrong. I make no apologies for being a libertarian.
Oh, I'll have to talk to the LP Indiana about this. You should do a fact check and just confirm everything on everything that's been stated.
You should. Jared's all over it. Talk to him. But yeah,
I'm like, I like Jared. We got this.
That's the thing. Like Jared and I were on this former Senate candidate's thread, who's a Republican, going, "This is despicable. Libertarians should denounce it." And I said, I fully embrace it and endorse it, and I make no apologies because there's nothing on it that's wrong. And then we started posting pictures of GOP tier buckets, and because to make a very specific point to all those watching, make no apologies for being a libertarian. you shouldn't make apologies for it. And that is one thing that Donald Trump, I think, has taught me, is that you
may have to make a lot of explanations.
You may have to, you have to be tough at a certain point. You can't make apologies for not being popular. And as a person who is a natural people pleaser, I sometimes want to go, I'm sorry, I know this isn't but it's really helpful. And that to me is nonsense. I'm happy that Lucy Brenton has 3 and hopefully 6 more mailers coming in your mailbox here in Indiana. And I don't care who paid for it. Because at the end of the day, it helps a person who should be senator and hurts a person who should not. And I make no apologies for it. I make no apologies for the fact that I support Lucy Brenton, and neither should you.
Well, and just kind of, back to the whole, it's just one hypocrisy after the other is, I know I like political mailers. I always ask people to just save me whatever political mailers you get, because, there is something to be said about there's no such thing as bad press, especially even when it comes to, political mailers. If you got people who are in the middle or who are even on your side, negative or attack mailers may not necessarily play out the way that your opponent intends them to. Sometimes they can still read, with the people that you need votes for to your advantage.
Right.
And both parties know this. You hear Republicans all the time laughing about oh yeah, did you see this Democratic mailer they sent out and how much it makes people like us more? Okay, well, now you're just pissed that somebody else is benefiting.
Yeah. One thing that was brought up on we have a weekly call with our co-hosts and writers, and one of our guys, who shall go nameless, mentioned the command climate. He's in the military, and I never heard this, and he goes, this is where Donald Trump fails, because Donald Trump is responsible because he fails to be a good commander. He fails to be a good leader. And so I had him write some stuff up, and he actually pulled from the Army Doctrine, Army Regulation 600-100. The definition is it's an organizational climate. So the command climate is basically the attitude that the organization has because of the way that the leader operates. And so the climate of an organization is how people interact within the culture of their peers, subordinates, and leaders. Observed policies and practices often drive climate, reflecting the leader's character. The greatest influence on an organization's climate is the quality of its leadership. The commander sets the example by establishing high standards and expectations for the organization and its members. The best commanders place a high priority on personally developing their subordinate leaders, caring for the welfare of soldiers, Army civilians, and their families, while creating a rewarding climate of shared mutual trust and pride in team contributions to mission accomplishment. So I want you to think about Donald Trump and how he operates his staff, how you've heard him operate his business, and then how the society is functioning under Donald Trump as a leader. As I read these 6 overarching characteristics of a healthy Army culture and organizational climate. The organizational culture and unit climate fosters unity, cohesion, and trust in accordance with the Army ethic. Sarah, do you think that Donald Trump embodies unity? Does he foster unity? Does he foster cohesion? And does he foster trust?
No, I think that's exactly counter to his goals. That doesn't work with his base.
Right. Number 2, the culture promotes and rewards mental agility. Okay.
I love the highly uneducated.
Right. I know all the best words. The ability to break from established paradigms, recognize new patterns or circumstances, and adopt new solutions to problems. Has Donald Trump fostered mental agility? Has he tried to recognize new patterns and find new solutions to the big problems of our day?
I think he tries to recognize new patterns, but I think he tends to default back to old solutions.
I think he thinks about things in terms of pattern. If you want to know how Donald Trump views policy, think about 1940s and 50s movies.
Yeah, I mean it is. He's still in a very Cold War mindset in a lot of ways, which is just weird in 2018.
This one's not terribly applicable. The organization, number 3, the organization selects leaders and reward members who demonstrate the ability to sense and understand the environment quickly, to exploit fleeting opportunities or counter unexpected threats. I think he's actually very good at this. exploit fleeting opportunities or counter unexpected threats. He did not expect that there would be a bomber. He was very frustrated that the bomber was making headlines. Then the shooting was a tragedy that he knew could overwhelm him days before. And so what does he do early this week? First thing Monday morning, I want to overturn the 14th Amendment by executive order.
Yeah, they tell me I can't do it, but I've been told I can.
Right. So I think he does that one well. Number 4, the culture requires and rewards delegation of authority on the part of leaders and the understanding and prompt, thorough execution of leaders' intent 2 levels up by subordinates. So do you think that Donald Trump delegates authority to his leaders, and do you think that the people who are operating in the executive branch have an understanding and a prompt, thorough execution of Donald Trump's intents?
Yeah, I would say he maybe thinks he delegates, but part of delegation is, like you said, is accurate communication and clear understanding of the goals and intentions. How many jobs does Jared Kushner have?
Every single week in the New York Times, Maggie Haberman reports about how nobody knows what's going on because Donald Trump will change his mind tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5.
And he'll change the person tomorrow.
Exactly. Number 5, the organizational culture selects and rewards leaders who provide clear priorities and focus their unit's time and organizational energy on their mission. And I think that the mission for most of the people surrounding Donald Trump are to please Donald Trump. So he may have nailed it.
Yeah, if he had a different mission, then I would say no. But I guess if that's the only mission, yeah.
Number 6, the organizational culture is one of inclusion, which demands and values diversity of knowledge and perspectives that members of different groups bring and shapes how the mission is accomplished. So do you think, Mitch Daniels here, when he became governor, hired Mickey Maurer, a Democrat, to run the Commerce Division. He wanted to hire the best and brightest. George Bush, brought in a lot of people who, had worked with his dad, but there were also some people like Colin Powell who disagreed with a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama, I think, had some level of intellectual diversity.
You do find few people within the Trump administration who can get away with disagreeing with him,
right?
But it's definitely not a rule. I mean, I was impressed at how long Nikki Haley stuck around.
Yeah. So, and I would say, let's continue on. The state of morale and level of satisfaction of members of an organization is the climate as it's defined. So command climate is a reflection of unit's members' perceptions about the unit, and creating a positive organizational climate is a core leader competency. And so I just don't think that Donald Trump is very competent as a leader, to be honest. And, our researcher writes, a positive command climate is best described as an environment that fosters trust, open communication, and an overall positive mindset towards the mission at hand. The opposite of a positive command climate is always referred to as a toxic command climate. Within a toxic command climate, subordinates are typically micromanaged, belittled, there is no trust, there is no communication, and people dread coming to work, which has been said by people who have left the administration. Mm-hmm. The Army puts a lot of emphasis on ensuring leaders create a positive command climate, and it is believed that the actions and attitude are a direct reflection of a leader.
Toxic is a really good and really important word there. You take something that can be good and it corrupts it and makes it terrible.
So he's saying, I've seen the effect a brigade commander has on an organization of 4,500 soldiers as they start to embody his attitude. And so you have this group of people, and yes, we'd all like to think that the military is somehow more Borg-like than human beings, but let's be honest, your Aunt Donna's Facebook feed looks just like your Uncle Roy's. Mm-hmm. I mentioned command climate because it is interesting to see the effect Trump has had on the Republican Party. He is also our commander-in-chief in the military, so his leadership has had an effect on our organization. The idea that the leader at the top sets the tone for the organization he leads is absolutely self-evident for me. I would be very curious to look into the different climates set by Obama and Trump, where they differed and what the effects are on the close circle of people the president works for. I would say that Barack Obama, I think, had a fairly poor ability to lead people. I think Bush had a little bit of a better ability because he had been a governor. I think there's something to be said for somebody who has been in the executive branch and then becomes president or is a business owner. And so Donald Trump had like 5 employees. I mean, he really in his corporate headquarters, people who were very close to him. So you know, I don't give Obama a lot of credit, but Obama was at least a little more in terms of tone steady. But regulation not as much. So, but I thought it was a very interesting idea.
I think what Obama was that Trump has taken, you know, to the next level there is he didn't view himself necessarily in that command role.
Right.
So in that role where you need to be, you know, you need to be an example, you need to show what kind of behavior you expect. He rather viewed himself as the figurehead. And when you're dealing with any company, you know, the job of the CEO and the job of the spokesperson are not necessarily the same. And a lot of times you don't want them to be the same person, because the person who's going to, you know, provide a good example and care about the people is not the same person who's going to, you know, get really good interviews for the press. And now you've got Trump, because now we just expect, okay, well, we want a good spokesperson. The president is supposed to just be our spokesperson, right?
Right.
And he has no command abilities. And, you know, that has its impact.
Yeah, I think as we talked in the last episode with Rob from the Swamp, you know, his inability to fill out and staff the executive branch has brought a lot of chaos on the government. And so ultimately his chaotic personality and style, I think, has brought some chaos to society. What I hate is that it matters so much who president. It matters to society and how we act. Who is president has that much effect on us. And I really do think that it does have some effect. I think the presidency is far too powerful because we look at them. Part of it is that we do look at the president for moral leadership, maybe not consciously, but we do. But then at the same time, you watch the Sunday shows and they're all like, "Oh, these guys think that we still think of politicians as moral. We look to them for leadership." Okay. So it bugs me that it really does matter what kind of leadership style the president has in terms of the country.
So it can bug you. It's still impactful.
I know. That's why we gotta get rid of this government. That's number one. So
what, are you going to become an anarchist now?
I mean, my views are very close to an anarchist, but I'm too practical. I want to solve problems.
The best way I've ever heard it put was, I think anarchy it's just not sustainable, because small governments would pop up in like a couple weeks.
Yeah, well, the point of this entire show, and part of what I want to do in my life, is use this show to impact people with the message that liberty starts with your personal development. And so,
you have to be a good person.
Yeah. If we don't change ourselves, if we don't change our culture by changing ourselves, and then our culture changes our government.
Liberty demands character, and that's something that really differentiates it from from authoritarian philosophies. And this is something you hear brought up a lot, is people just want to ask, oh, well, you know, I want to be able to, you know, I care about this as a topic, and that therefore our government should address it. Yeah. Rather than saying, I care about this, therefore I want to do something about it. But then whenever you want to undermine, you know, the other side, you're like, oh, well, if you really cared about that, what are you personally doing?
Right.
You know, I think what makes libertarians different is that we at least should, and a lot of libertarians I know do take the steps to realize, like, you have to have that personal action and go, well, actually, you know, when I say I care about children and I think that we should not be, you know, separating them from their families, I say that because these are the things that I do in my community to help children and families.
Right. Yeah, if you want to get rid of welfare, but you have no set structure in your life where you're giving to people.
Do any sort of like helping feed the poor?
Yeah, there's no service aspect to your life. Then
do you know where your local food pantry is?
Right. You know, and so I think it's things like that you have to think, if we eradicate this thing, then how do we solve that thing? You know, because the reality is we have this notion that somehow we live in this like overwhelmingly structured society. You pretty much live in anarchy on a daily basis in certain ways. You may have less money in your paycheck, but it's just like my tires, for instance. Nobody was protecting my property, and nobody has since tried to recover my property.
Yeah.
The police don't really protect you, and they have really no business protecting you. Like, you live on the edge of anarchy on a daily basis. And boy, when all these bubbles start popping, I guarantee in the next 1 to 2 years, We're going to
the only thing that the government really holds is the threat of, enforcement. And I think the thing that career criminals seem to have kind of figured out is like at what point that is just a threat.
Yes. And so if your personal behavior isn't going to change the world, if all government ended today and you weren't doing anything differently, like what would that look like? And so I think you really have to think about your own behavior and your own character and how you interact with people. And it starts with non-violence towards others, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I want to talk about violence because we have this idea, as we've talked about, that we live in like this crazy time. Like you'd think, Sarah, if you watched the news, that we lived in the most violent political era of all time.
It's because it's all on video.
Right. That has to be it. It has to be the internet.
Well, it's more in your face. I mean, this happened with...
My face is not
Vietnam
violent.
War. Think of the Vietnam War. You know, we've had a lot more war before we started getting video of war. And then we went, oh, shoot, is this what we're doing? Because I don't want to be part of this.
And notice how we've changed the nature of war to kind of keep it out of the headlines.
Oh, yeah. Well, and to separate it, too. I mean, now you've drone warfare. You're actually dealing with a whole new phenomenon of drone pilots having PTSD, but there is a different way of dealing with it because it has a whole different set of triggers because they're dealing with PTSD from their actions from thousands of miles away.
It's amazing. I hadn't heard that.
Mm-hmm.
So our great research team put together some of the highlights of violence in American political history, and a lot of this, I knew some of it, but some of it is really surprising. And then after we kind of go through some of these instances, we're going to give you the straight dope on whether or not this is indeed a more violent time. First, Bleeding Kansas, 1854 to 61, an interstate civil war which took place in the years leading up to the American Civil War in Kansas. 56 people were killed in the fights between pro and anti-slavery factions. We've talked about this on some bonus content before. The Haymarket Affair in 1886. A bomb blast erupted during a workers' demonstration. Police ended up opening fire, and 11 people were killed. And that was a bunch of commies. The Wilmington Insurrection out near you in North Carolina in 1898. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's called.
I'm sure there's a few battlefields.
Yeah, it's called the only successful coup in U.S. history. North Carolina's Democratic Party instigated a violent overthrow of the democratically elected fusionist government. The coup was carried out by 2,000, a mob of 2,000 white men. Black politicians from the fusion government were ousted, and black businesses were destroyed, and the death toll is estimated between 60 to 300.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 1920, you had the Wall Street bombing. 100 pounds of dynamite was detonated across from J.P. Morgan and Chase, killing 38 and wounding hundreds more. The bombing was never solved, but anarchist and communist groups were blamed and investigated. Then, of course, you have the Klan from 1865 through the Civil Rights era. 100 years of just African Americans living in fear, being murdered, oftentimes from local governments and police. If they were not involved, they turned a blind eye or helped facilitate it, or were Klan members themselves. So let's go to kind of some of the more recent events. Those are the most deadly events. Let's go to the more recent. The Weather Underground from 69 to 77, founded at the University of Michigan, the Students for Democratic Society, a left-wing campus group. The Weather Underground formally declared war on the U.S. government, and they were responsible for several bombings, including in the Pentagon. From 73 to 75, the Symbionese Liberation Army, they kidnapped Patty Hearst. They committed 2 murders and several bank robberies. Antifa, which is currently active. Antifa has its roots in 20s Germany as Antifascist Action. I don't know German. My great-grandfather's very disappointed. A group that battled an organized fascist movement. Basically, they were the guys fighting the brown shirts in the streets in the 20s in Germany. And so now they're back. They believe in direct action against any perceived fascism. Now they just call everything fascism, including shutting down a debate between Yaron Brook and Sargon of Akkad in Britain at the College of London. They practice something called a black bloc, where they all dress in black and cover their faces and block things from happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is important that we start really recognizing Antifa as it's on par with the Weather Underground. I think we're in the beginning stages of them. We're starting to see more action from them. I think it's starting as they attack. If they attack people on the right or they just attack regular people trying to drive down the streets, the media doesn't care. But when they start attacking the media and breaking their cameras, now we're starting to actually see coverage of it. Right. But then a Proud Boy on the right kicks somebody, and then all of a sudden it's, breaking
front page news.
Right. It is. It's just different standards for the left and right. And that does drive people crazy. And then the left tries to gaslight us and say they don't. The media says that, I don't do that. We don't do that. We're straight and fair and honest. It's like, no, you're not.
Everybody has their bias.
Exactly. May 19th, Communist Organization, active from 78 to 85, a splinter group of the WOU. They were tied to the Black Liberation Movement, and they fell apart by 85 when they were arrested by the FBI. So those, that's 69 to 85 there here in America. Then in 92, you had the Ruby Ridge standoff where Randy Weaver, former Army engineer and alleged white supremacist, refused to become an ATF informant after he bought 2 illegally modified shotguns from an undercover agent. He didn't appear in court, and so the FBI and the ATF and the U.S. Marshals went up to his compound, and there was a shootout. His 14-year-old son was killed. I think they killed his wife first, or the son first, and then it was a standoff between the initial shootout was between a team of 6 marshals who were surveilling the property, and then 1 marshal was killed. 2 members of the Weaver family died before the standoff ended. They also killed the family's dog. And it was a very radical thing that the government, for the first time, the government really was going after people, and people died. And I think it was a moment when people, so Sarah, we always talk about the force of government, but this was a moment where the force of government was fully on display. And because this guy didn't comply with what the government said, his wife, his son, and his dog ended up being killed by government agents as they descended on his home.
He faced that government gun that we always talk about, that we're always told is just, you're just exaggerating.
I was in 2nd grade. This is 1992. This is not that far off.
Well, that's when I was born, actually.
Oh, rub it in. 96 Olympics bombing. Eric Rudolph carried out pipe bombings that killed 2 and wounded 111 because he wanted to embarrass the government for condoning abortion and homosexuality. Then there was the 51-day siege at Waco in 1993, a cult led by David Kokesh, where they were suspected of stockpiling firearms on their ranch. And 86 Davidians, women, and children were amongst the dead. And then, motivated by the Ruby Ridge and the Waco siege, Timothy McVeigh killed 168 in Oklahoma City as he detonated a truck bomb outside of an FBI, outside of a federal government agency. And then there was a shooting. I mean, people don't even know, Planned Parenthood shooting where 3 were killed and 9 were injured at an abortion clinic in Colorado Springs. So there are things that have continually happened, but they're kind of lessening. So there is definitely a downturn in political violence. I'd
be interested to know how much of that is a downturn in intent for political violence and how much of that is a downturn in outcome.
Well, violence is down. Murder is down. But I also agree with you. I also think that we have, as a society, a better awareness of people's pathologies and motivations. And so we ascribe less to politics. I don't look at this Gab shooter and say 11 people died because of politics. I say 11 people died because of mental illness. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that people...
because nobody flagged the guy with the crazy van.
Right. I mean, he certainly was anti-religious. It was a hate crime. But at the end of the day, the guy, anybody who picks up a gun and intentionally kills a group of people, or really anybody, when it's not in self-defense.
I think it's too easy, for us to write that off as this clearly, anybody who has that intent, anybody who's capable of that, should have we should have known that. But at the same time, I'm not really confident there's any way to know for sure the difference between somebody who's actually going to go and shoot up a synagogue and somebody who has really problematic views and you try not to be around because you think he's kind of crazy.
Well, the feeling is that if we get these people off of social networks, if we get these people out of polite society, so to speak, then that's going to stop this, and that's a fool's errand.
No, that just drives people underground. That allows people to meet other people like them and plan, or to become, we have lone gunmen all the time. You don't need other people in order to plan heinous acts.
Right. So this is from Joseph Trevithick and Matthew Galt of warisboring.com. They write, the objectively low levels of violence in 2016, brawls at rallies aside, is a relatively recent phenomenon. In 240 years, assassins have gunned down 4 sitting presidents. Myriad individuals have planned to kill at least 18 of the nation's 44 chief executives. Of course, some would-be killers were driven by mental illness, cult beliefs, or a desire for fame rather than politics. They go on to talk about how the expanding voting rights is part of, while a necessary progressive step, is an unfortunate byproduct. I thought this was fascinating. As the roles expanded,
more people who engage in political violence.
It's right. More people have more skin in the game, which is why, Sarah, we need to take away women's right to vote. As the roles expand, just kidding. We need to.
I have a crossbow. You can try.
We need to get rid of white men's ability to vote. They're the dangerous ones.
Yeah, here's the thing: is that that's never happened. And that's why we find it so hilariously funny, is because you can never even picture that. Whereas it's a different kind of funny to say let's take away women's rights to vote. You've only had those for not even 100 years.
Yeah. As the roles expanded, a larger politically active populace grew. Reports of voter intimidation, vote buying, ballot stuffing, and other forms of election fraud became more common. They talk about Abraham Lincoln voters being barred from the polls. South Carolina, white supremacists clashed with black citizens, and you had the Hamburg Massacre, which in 1921, a white mob backed by aircraft-carrying incendiary devices burned the black community of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, killing around 300 people. It was one of the...
I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's one of the worst massacres in American history. So look up the Hamburg Massacre. Obviously, you have the Klan. And so I thought that was an interesting, as more people have more skin in the game and more people are involved in the political process, violence starts to tick up. So
at least the violence that we consider political violence. I mean,
yes.
Prior to those people having rights, it wasn't political violence. It was just domestic violence, or it was just, keeping your slaves in line.
So what is to come?
Maybe it's just a transfer of violence. Maybe it's just now that we're all within the political realm now, there seems to be more political violence, even though there's less violence overall. We're just all more engaged in politics.
I think everything is politics now because the government is involved in so much. And so it's also become the easy thing to blame.
Yep. Sorry, conservatives. Football is politics because the government pays for stadiums.
Right. Evolutionary anthropologist Peter Turchin believes political violence and its future potential can be analyzed quantitatively. So it's not enough just to have political discontent. So you have to have other factors that actually cause a rise in either revolution or major violence to happen. And so what he calls it is elite overproduction. And we've got the full article in the show notes. A more important factor is what has been called elite overproduction. That is the appearance of too many elite candidates vying for a limited supply of power positions within the government and the economy. As written about in my book, War and Peace and War, elite overproduction results in intense intra-elite competition, polarization, and conflict that ultimately takes violent forms. So now think back to when I talked about that study, that report for earlier in the year. It is white elites on one side fighting white elites on the other, and we're all stuck in the middle. So you never know what will break the camel's back, like in Tunisia, Mohamed Bouazizi, the fruit vendor in Tunisia. Think of a forest in which dead wood has been accumulating for many years. We don't know what will start the fire. What is the precipitating spark? And he talks about cycles of violence, and you can see this here in this chart. You can see in the 1800s, there's massive amounts of violence that takes place. And then there's an uptick in the 70s because of what we talked about. And it is on the rise, but it is still way, way, way down from where we were in the 70s and definitely in the 1800s. So So we are definitely at a low point in violence. And so he also described signs of elite overproduction that are relevant to today. In the last 3 or 4 decades, real wages of unskilled workers stagnated. The incomes of the top 1%, on the other hand, grew explosively, leading to ever-increasing economic inequality. Signs of elite overproduction include a growing demand for educational credentials, tuition rates at elite colleges that rise much faster than inflation, and the exploding numbers of new MBAs and JDs. Intra-elite competition and conflict are indicated by a rampant polarization within the U.S. Congress and increasing legislative deadlock. Finally, the declining health of the government finances can be traced to the federal debt. So these are things that we need to keep an eye on, and I definitely think that we're in a moment where we have serious issues ahead, and I think if Facebook tanks, like I think Facebook will, Facebook should never be valued at the same level as GE. Tesla should not be valued at the same level as Ford. There is a huge tech bubble. There is a huge credit bubble. There is a huge student loan debt bubble. There is another housing crisis bubble being. And let us not forget the American government's debt bubble. If one or several of these things burst at the same time, that is a very bad that's a bad time, Sarah.
Yeah. Anybody who has their money in this economy, at least.
Yeah. So I think when you really look at some of where we've been in society, we're not as things are not as bad as it seems, and this is
yeah, that's very clear.
Yeah, you doing this and doing the Daily Show, I'm sure you see this all the time. Once you actually like dig into facts and like look at statistics, and you go, things are not as bad as everybody makes it out to seem.
Yeah, this is something I just got used to just in working in, I would say work in childcare, but I work more with parents actually.
Mm-hmm.
And new parents especially. And like people put so much just weight on how they're going to raise their kids and want to make sure they have all the information. You know, it does require you to stop and just be like, okay, well, let's step back and go, what are the risks? What are we actually working with? And realize that like, wow, we're really dealing with a lot of things that are not necessary. They're not that bad.
Right.
You know, it's the same thing. You just need to step back and look at the reality of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. And just take a deep breath and realize that things are not as bad as it seems. Because in reality,
turn off Facebook.
Yeah. Shapiro talked about this today, and I think he's totally right. Fear always motivates people more than hope. So fear, and studies have been shown time and time again that if you're trying to get people to change their voting behavior, you need to scare them.
Oh, yeah.
And so when you are being told to fear someone or think less of someone, or someone is stealing something that you have, or the globalists are going to take it, or the blacks are to blame, or the white man is the devil.
Hope just leads to disappointment.
Right. And so that's really what I think a lot of the identity politics on the left is about. It is about creating a tension and fear of in and out groups amongst each other, to pit each other for both inter-party squabbles and also to defeat the other side. Somebody is keeping you down, and there are legitimate problems of inequality in our society, but they get exploited for political purposes. Donald Trump takes legitimate problems that we have in society and then exploits them for political purposes. And so if you're feeling angry about something in politics, it's usually because you're being taken advantage of.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go slightly off topic here to actually try and get us to shift to our last question that you gave me, because we're doing that annoying thing that I always tell you is terrible, where we're over 2 hours now.
I don't mind. This next,
I know you don't mind.
The people love it. They want more. This is the last topic, and I was there anyways. Thank you,
I'm sorry.
Sarah. Yeah, I almost want to say like, well, let's not do this, but I've trimmed this part for time twice now. And so I don't want, like, Hody did such a great job on how we should approach politics that I don't want to not do it because we're over time. So yes.
So let's talk about why force doesn't work.
Force doesn't work. nonviolent campaigns work better than violent campaigns. And so Psychology Today did a survey. Nonviolent campaigns have a 53% rate of success versus violent campaigns, which have a 23%. You're 30% less likely to succeed. They have a nonviolent 20% rate of complete failure. Violent campaigns trying to use force to get your way, 60% of the time you will fail. So it just statistically, it's not going to work out. So why does that happen? Nonviolent campaigns attract more participants, including women, elderly folks, others who do not want to take the risks or the moral burdens of running around with guns or explosives. And so people are more willing to get engaged if it's nonviolent.
It also sticks better.
It does. So second, when a tyrannical government acts to suppress a nonviolent movement, it is more likely to backfire. Government security forces don't want to open fire on unarmed civilians, especially when the crowd might include their mothers, daughters, friends, and neighbors. And if unarmed civilians are attacked, other citizens are likely to mobilize, and the government loses support from the local community, the international community, the local media, the financial sectors.
It matters who hits first.
It's exactly right. And in the case of the Proud Boys versus Antifa, who hits it all? And as I've said before, libertarians, we may not think of ourselves as right or left, but the left, and by extension the media, mainstream media, certainly thinks of us as right of center.
Yeah.
And the outcome is more likely to be democratic than authoritarian when you overthrow a government. So it sounds kind of idealistic, but if you look at some of the real-world examples of nonviolent campaigns and protest, the Salt March, for instance, in Mahatma Gandhi was the British told their citizens that they weren't allowed to collect or sell salt, which was at that time, they were a primitive society in India. Salt has always been incredibly important because it's used for preservatives, it's used for a myriad of uses. And so when you tell a population that they can't collect or sell salt, that's a huge injustice. So he walked 240 miles leading protesters to the Arabian Sea to pick up a small handful of salt out of the muddy waters of the sea. Only 17 years later, after this peaceful yet defiant act, India gained independence from Britain. So overthrow trunk or treat in your hometown. Just say no to trunk or treat, Sarah.
Yeah, you have to, when you're being violent, people can go ahead and draw their own conclusions about what you are trying to advocate for, what you're trying to achieve. But when you're going through nonviolent means, people have to pay attention or listen in some way in order to get an idea of what you're doing. Yes. And yes, it makes it easier to overlook you, which is always the fear is, well, if I'm not violent, if I'm not in your face, then I'll get ignored. But, when people are violent in your face, do you listen?
Yeah. The suffrage movement, I made a joke about it, but the suffrage movement is actually a great example of Yeah,
let's be clear. Women had to convince men to let them vote first.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a great example of guerrilla nonviolent warfare because women were able to use all myriad of tactics that women are good at.
Well, some of those tactics, though, we shouldn't look back on with pride. I mean, one of the top tactics was actually pointing to the fact that black men had the right to vote. And
right.
One of the big arguments being made was that a white woman has more right to vote than any black man.
Right.
And, I don't know. Those are the kinds of things that I think about when earlier we were talking about, some point having to have, kind of an amorality when it comes to politics, but you got to draw a line somewhere.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think women saying to their husband, like, how are you voting on this amendment today?
Yeah.
There are things like that I think the suffrage movement, excuse me, they were suffragettes, is an important...
that with even that, like it was created as a derogatory term.
Right.
It's little voting woman.
Right. Montgomery bus boycott. There are times when one person's peaceful actions can bring about more change than anyone can imagine. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus in Montgomery is one such example. Her defiant act symbolized greater civil rights, spreading the message that all people deserve equal seats. It was a year later, in 1956, that segregation on public buses was ruled unconstitutional. Rosa Parks said, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically or no more tired than I usually am at the end of a working day. I was not old, although some people have an image of me being old then. I was 42. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in." And I think that's an important emotion that you see continually, like the fruit vendor in Tunisia that set off the Arab Spring. You know, it was constant government officials coming up and saying, "You got to pay me this bribe or you can't come back here tomorrow." And finally, he just had enough and he lit himself on fire. And so it is those small little acts of defiance, but it's also those little small acts of compliance that eventually add up to a person finally snapping and saying, "I'm not going to comply anymore. I'm not going to obey anymore."
I mean, that's exercising your liberty. That's the thing we always try and get through as a basic principle to people, is that even when your choices are coerced, there's always some level of choice in that. And that the good that we can do is by maximizing the amount of choice that you have,
right,
and minimizing the amount of coercion.
So obviously we're a country that started peaceful and then ended up being a violent birth. But if you compare the American Revolution to the French Revolution, obviously it ended up being far less. We had one constitution. We had one Articles of Confederation, one constitution, in the same time that France had 17 constitutions and then lost it to tyranny. So obviously violence can erupt from peaceful protests in mass scales, but you have a better chance of convincing people to your side if you are not the aggressor. For instance, France coming to the aid of the American government.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the hallmarks of a nonviolent protest? This is The Art of Protest by the New York Times. First and foremost, you've got to plan. The civil rights movement planned like none other, including down to having people rough each other up and call them the same names that they would be called when they sat at the lunch counters. You're going to go and you're not going to comply. You're going to sit at the white lunch counter. You're going to be hit and beaten, and this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like emotionally. And these were the small little planning things that they did that really made the difference in the long run. Provoke your opponent if necessary. Martin Luther King in the march in Birmingham did something very controversial. He allowed children to walk in the march as young as 6 years old. And it was even criticized by Malcolm X. And when the fire hoses and the dogs were turned on the crowd and the children were at risk, that is really what made the nightly news. That is what made the front page. And it was a strong moral appeal to public opinion. And it showed protesters making sacrifices for their cause, and it lured opponents into violence that finally... So when their opponents finally gave in to violence, that's what swayed the view of whites. And so what I think is kind of lost a lot of times in the civil rights narrative and any fight for justice is that you have to have a sympathetic minority within the in-group to help fight your cause. And so Martin Luther King was in the out-group. He was part of Black America. And you had to have a certain segment of the in-group, white America, to participate in the struggle with you, to be your advocate on the inside, so then you can be more effective. And so that's part of why, like, I don't understand sometimes, like, the Black Lives Matter movement, where they're intentionally provocative to people that could be in the in-group. For instance, Kaepernick's not kneeling or kneeling for the anthem. It needlessly infuriated a lot of veterans and police officers and people that, if you're trying to get a behavior to change in police officers, why would you piss them off?
Yeah.
So you have to have a certain segment of that in-group that can then vouch for you. When you go and talk to them and they're unsure, the friendly voice next to them goes, yeah, they're right, you know.
Yeah, you need somebody who's going to follow them back to the station and listen to the complaint, and then also go, yeah, but I mean, did you hear these couple of other things that they said?
Right. So protests are most effective when they aim for an achievable goal in one location, knowing that the real battle is for national public opinion. Think national, act local. On a local level, the civil rights movement often failed. For example, the concessions won by the Birmingham protesters were vague and modest, but in Birmingham, that finally gave momentum to the passage of the civil rights legislation. Use humor. So I'm actually reading a book by one of these, by Srđan Popović. In Serbia, the Otpor movement mobilized the country against dictator Milosevic by using pranks to cut through fear. Its daily fare consisted of street actions that painted Milosevic as absurd. When the tyrants dedicated a new bridge, Otpor built one out of styrofoam and held its own ceremony. He calls this laughtivism. It does more than conquer fear. Humor breaks down defenses, creating an openness that allows people to consider your argument. If the joke is good, even the police get it, said Ivan Morovic, another Otpor leader. And I think Hody writes in the notes, I think this is a good example why social justice warriors lose is because they seem rather humorless. And why a group like Liberty Memes wins is because they're making very keen political points in a humorous way.
Yeah.
You have to pull out the pillars. You have to go after, Otpor members went after grandparents and senior citizens. For instance, when you go after the pillars, the whole structure falls. Senior citizens and his police were two of Milosevic's most important pillars. Otpor members worked on both whenever they were arrested, which was often. Grandparents got angry when high school students were repeatedly arrested. At every presence, they would talk to the police and make them laugh and make them seem like people. Police officers would complain to us about their salaries, they said. If you later order these people to shoot us, well, don't count on it. And so they had become friends with the ground troops for Milosevic, this dictator who coined ethnic cleansing. And they were able to, through charm, erode the power of the police. Exploit galvanizing events. During the 70s, the U.S. built nuclear power plants. The first major protests came from the Clamshell Alliance. And then when reactor number 2 at 3 Mile Island melted down, then they were able to quickly mobilize and make their point quickly. But they had done work ahead of time. So yeah, I think those are some really great points in how to actually conduct yourself when you're planning in your local area. I mean, what are some local nonviolent activism things that you've seen successful in your time in politics?
Oh gosh, put me on the spot there.
That's hard.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about what you said, where you act local. Think national is one thing that was really big in North Carolina was actually the bathroom bill.
Yeah.
HB2, which locally, they're said that, okay, that it was repealed. It was kind of a bullshit repeal. It didn't really do anything. It actually, in the repeal, it barred cities from being able to make any sort of non-discrimination ordinances for, I think, 3-year cooling down period. But it caused this big national conversation around like, whoa, is this something that we want to be legislating? And it caused, I know the Obama administration came out with, its guidance, which has now, gone into the Trump administration. But it was something that the people who were dealing with it locally knew that this was worth fighting. And they said this a lot too, that it was worth fighting for and getting something through because it was necessary to have the conversation.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't going to win.
Yeah. And weren't there a lot of like funny attempts? Like people would do things.
Yeah,
with
the bathroom signs.
Yeah.
Oh, Charlotte is still a fantastic place to go, just to go to the bathroom there, because you will not. You are hard pressed to actually find male and female signed bathrooms. There's some of them will just use just pictures of random things. The Prince symbol is a pretty popular one, but the whole point being, to get you to laugh and to question that, like, oh, this is literally just an arbitrary symbol that we've made. Transgender bathrooms have been masquerading for decades as family bathrooms, and nobody had a problem with it.
Yeah. At my work, we have 2 bathrooms. And they have a male and a female sign, and we all go to the women's restroom all the time. And my female coworker, was like, "This is the ladies' room." I go, "I don't see gender, okay? I am a progressive when it comes to not seeing gender. And so I am going to use the ladies' room if I have to, because I support." And she's very liberal, very, progressive. And so she couldn't even argue with me. She's
yeah,
like,
tell her it's just a bathroom. The only reason, you know what? Tell her the only reason they're even gender segregated is because of government regulations.
That's right. I don't care if there's tampons in there. I'm comfortable with my masculinity. I know things happen down there that I don't understand, like sex.
Well, just a little more experience.
Yeah, one day. All right, Sarah. Well, see, now you see what a commitment the big show is. It's a big commitment. It's. Are you tired?
A little bit, but that's because you're like the last of my various appointments.
Yeah. Story of my life, Sarah. All right. Well, final thoughts for the episode, please, and also shameless self-promotion for things like speaking of Liberty. I'm too tired.
Yeah, Speaking of Liberty is a little bit on hiatus right now, so please check me out on YouTube at the We Are Libertarians channel for fundamental freedoms. We try to have a video out every Sunday. Some weeks we don't quite get the editing in time, but we are trying to get one out every week, and they're covering a variety of topics having to do with liberty.
Just 2-minute little.
Definitely check us out on WAL Daily, though. Much more common there.
The thing about the videos is, I know these are time commitments for people to listen to this stuff, and so Sarah really understands what she's talking about. Huh?
2 to 5 minutes.
2 to 5. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not gonna. I won't pigeonhole you. But yeah, just on a basic topic that people are talking about, and here's the libertarian position, just to get you to think that you can share, send it to friends. And so we try to be as consistent as possible. But hey, we're all volunteers here at We Are Libertarians. And
if you have any topics, that's always a help. If you have anything that you would really like, hey, can you give me a quick clip that I can share with some family and friends to explain this topic? We have one coming up that I'm going to record on our open borders policy. Why do we care about immigration like that?
And honestly, if you're a kick-ass video editor, let us know.
Oh, please.
So I
am highly technologically impaired.
Oh, you guys have no idea. She's a boomer. So I do the editing, but yeah, there's a lot going on. So if you're a kick-ass video editor, especially After Effects, Premiere, Motion, all that stuff, if you want to get involved, please. They're very easy videos to edit, so it takes some time to organize here. So anyways, more final thoughts from you, Sarah.
Just, when it comes to peaceful action, this goes back to, I deal with this with kids. You can force kids to do what you want. But you're not teaching them to do what you want. You're teaching them that if they're going to do something you don't want, they should not do it in front of you.
Yeah.
So it's not a lesson that sticks. You, in order to get people to change their minds about any topic, even when you're right, especially when you're right, it has to be done deliberately, and it has to be done through careful reasoning and through addressing, how can I frame this so that it matters to you? And part of that is going to be listening to actually understand your perspective.
You know what you should do? You should do a WAL Daily series called Political Boundaries, and it should be about a nanny's guide for adult boundaries in politics.
Oh, I could do that.
I think that'd be fascinating. I think you do a WAL Daily where you do the series where you talk about stuff like that, because I'm listening to that and I'm going, that's very common sense, but I don't think that's very common for people to have that sense. And so, you being a nanny, you really have thought deeply about human nature and psychology, so I think that'd be kind of interesting.
Yeah, my job is I specialize in the teeny tiny ones,
right? Where
you're really teaching them academic stuff. All you get to teach them at that age is how to not be terrible adults when you grow up.
Right.
So, yeah, I would love to talk about that. We'll definitely have to do that then.
Yeah, put that on the docket. Political Boundaries with Sarah Brady Wagner. All right. Any final thoughts?
You've asked me a few times. I think I've given them.
Okay.
Do you have any final thoughts, sir?
Listen, I like to make sure that you have said everything that you want to say, because I know that I get going and then
If I have more words, I'll make a video.
And then forget that anybody else is there. Poor Harry. I just have to remember to breathe sometimes. All right, I have no final thoughts. I have said everything that I want to say. I just want you to think about your relationship with the government and think about what the impact. We talked about command and control with Donald Trump.
Is it a healthy relationship? Is it an abusive relationship?
Yeah, like we talked about command and control with Donald Trump, and that is an individual. But when the real culprit is an overarching structure that lives above us, it's this man in the sky that's going to come out and get us at any given time, or it's going to bring us treats. And so we kind of have like built up Santa Claus and Satan at the same time, and we just need to learn to start taking responsibility for ourselves. So everybody, thank you for listening to We Are Libertarians. We appreciate it. Please be listening to WAL Daily. Be listening to all of the shows, like the Brian Nichols Show. A major jump in his numbers. A lot of you have caught on.
A fifth of the length of this.
Yeah, like they're all like 20 minutes. The WAL Daily are perfect for a drive, so you can go and listen to those. We do 3 a week at this point, so you get two walls, or you get and you get three short episodes just to kind of fill you in about various topics. And yeah, perfect for a drive. And please, if you're on a commute, like our friend that wrote the letter last time, if you're on a commute, indoctrinate your friends with your commuters. All right, thank you for joining us here in this episode of We Are Libertarians. Don't forget the election night party on Zoom. So if you want to join in, you got to be a $10 a month Patreon subscriber. And listen, if you've made it to this point in the episode, then you need to be supporting the show. We need you to start.
You care.
You really do get something out of this. You like this show. You get something out of it. And if you get something out of something, you must give something back. And so be a share on Facebook or Twitter, or with a friend that you know is a libertarian or kind of libertarian leaning if they're conservative or liberal at the moment. Like, just share the show, join Patreon, and listen, we'll all benefit. We'll be able to do more stuff. I've got to buy Sarah a webcam, maybe a computer, and I've got to buy like 5 microphones. And so we need the Patreon money. We need you to support us. I want to go to Students for Liberty in February. I want to have a booth there. So we need Patreon donations for that. So that's the kind of stuff that we use the Patreon money for, just to keep the network growing. And as I've added new people, I want to be able to give them the tools to do this kind of stuff. And if we ever make enough money, give them maybe some money for their time too. So join Patreon, and you get more stuff out of it. So, all right, thanks for joining us here on this episode of We Are Libertarians, and we will see you tomorrow.
Bye.
All right, thanks, Sarah. I didn't record that on Zoom, but that's okay. Shit. I was going to take that video. All right, well, thank you.
You didn't record that on Zoom?
Not on the video.